next, we're going to talk about more of how you got the car, because that's one of the craziest stories I've ever heard. Welcome back to the Exhaust Note podcast. I'm Brynn Patton, and this is John Kenney. This is part 2 of an episode we did a couple weeks ago, so if you haven't seen that, be sure to watch it. So, how did you get the car?
Well, I know you and I have talked, but happy to share with your listeners. Yeah, it's kind of a bizarre story, I guess. The car, the original acquisition was made by my father-in-law at Garage Francorchamps in Brussels, and that was the family Ferrari. So my wife grew up with that. Her sisters riding in the back seat and things. And if you kind of fast forward, they came back from an assignment that my wife's dad had in Europe supporting fighter aircraft at Ramstein Air Base. And the car, they used it a bit in the United States, but they were in Texas when they came back from Europe, and the heat and things like that, pretty tough on those cars because they really weren't designed for desert heat. Anyway, the car kind of sat because my father-in-law had an assignment to go to Vietnam to support fighter aircraft. So the first time he went, and by the way, he came back with a couple of different cars from Europe, an XKE and the GTE, and I think he brought back a Mini Cooper or something. But so the first time to Vietnam, he went supporting aircraft, and he came back after a year's assignment, and get settled back in, and he went out, and the XKE was missing. So went in and said, where's the XKE? And my mother-in-law said, well, I sold it. Well, you can imagine he was not happy about that his XKE is now missing. So he's got the GTE. Fast forward about another year, he gets another assignment to go support a different aircraft, in Thailand this time, but supporting the Vietnam War effort. And he said, I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. So he took the GTE to a friend's house, and he took it all apart and put it in boxes, so my mother-in-law would not sell the car while he was gone. So fast forward, comes back from Vietnam, had another assignment, went to Utah, moved around a couple other places, and then got an assignment to go to Pakistan to support the F-16 aircraft sales to Pakistan. And during that little time period, my wife and I met in Las Vegas. I was in the Air Force, and we moved to the DC area together, and we decided to get married. Anyway, I had not ever met her parents because they were in Pakistan. So we got married at a little white chapel at Bolling Air Force Base along the Potomac River, and we had her parents flew in, and we had the typical dinners around the wedding and things like that. And her dad came up to me and said, "Hey, I hear you're a car guy." And I went, "Yeah, I like cars." And he said, "Well, do you like Ferraris?" And I went, "Yeah, I'm from rural Ohio, but yes, I like Ferraris." He said, "Well, we should have a conversation then." So we went and sat and talked, and he told me about the Ferrari for the first time. And so we made a deal that we would take ownership of the Ferrari, and so the deal was struck there to take it over. I didn't know what state it was in. He just said it was in Texas, and then I found out later it was actually in boxes in Texas. So we hired, being in the military, didn't have very much money, so I hired the cheapest guy I could find that could bring the car to the, garage in the townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia. So this thing shows up on an open trailer covered in ice because we were having an ice storm, with all of its guts inside and packed in the trunk. And the driver of the truck, myself, and I called my friend Michael Yunt, and we slipped and slid, and we finally got the car shoved into the one car garage in the townhouse we were renting. And so the adventure began. Let the ice melt off of it, and we started taking it apart and figuring out what all was there, just cataloging parts and things like that. But that was an adventure all by itself.
Were all the parts to the car in the boxes?
Yeah, which is kind of another. I'll say yes, with very few exceptions. Her dad had taken nuts and bolts and he just put them in cans. They weren't all necessarily labeled as to where they went. So that was a huge effort, just laying out nuts and bolts and looking at the manual and looking at parts and trying to make things fit in parts and go, yeah, that doesn't go there, or yeah, that goes there. And we actually did a pretty darn good job, all things considered. We got more people that actually knew Ferraris. We did a good job getting that initial assembly put together. So it was a true adventure. And like I said, with in the earlier episode, with the help of the Italian embassy, we were able to translate the only manual we had, which is in Italian, and sorted out how things went together and how to tune it up and things like that.
What was the hardest piece to fit to the car?
The one that took the longest problem to solve was the fact when the car came back, and back up a little bit. When the car came back from Europe, the dock workers had tried to break into the car, and when they did, they stole some of the tools out of the toolkit. They stole the battery. They stole the tail light, strangely enough, and they tried to pry the Ferrari emblem off the nose. And so there was some damage there. Her dad got some of those things fixed. It took years to find the right pieces to go back. I wrote letters to the Prancing Horse and to magazines. I wrote the factory to find the right taillights that went with a Series 1 car. We knew it was a very early car. And strangely enough, from one of the letters I wrote to a magazine, a fellow in France called me one night and, in very broken English, said, I have 2 sets of taillights, and they're right. And I said, well, how much do you want for them? And he said, I have 1 pair brand new. And he gave a price, and I went, I can't afford that. So he said, I have used ones, and they're $400. And you have to understand, we didn't have a lot of money, to work with. So I said, okay, I'll take those. And he said, you can I'll send you information to wire the money. So I told my wife what I had done, and she said, we don't have $400. So I literally went into the Pentagon the next day, and I took a loan out for $300 from the Navy Federal Credit Union so I could buy the taillights. And sure enough, wired the money, taillights, and they're still in the garage, on the car as they came in the box from France. There are all kinds of little stories like that, but the hardest piece was the car. There's maybe a dozen cars or so, very few cars Let's put it that way. They don't know the exact number. That has a chrome spear that's an extension of the center stainless strip on the hood, and it's about 3 inches long, and it sits above the Ferrari emblem. And I searched for years and years and years, and finally, about 6 or 7 years ago, I made one with the help of my friend Michael Yunt. And we cut up pieces and had a shop called Brightworks in Ohio finish it. And that's what's on the car today. And all the Ferrari experts, you couldn't tell that it wasn't the original one. That was the longest to come up with, the hardest one to replace. All kinds of stories like that, Brynn.
You mentioned before we started recording that you also had a Nissan 240Z. So, how is the 250 GTE different to drive than, say, the Z?
Okay, it's quite different, and the garage, we call it the Axis Powers. So we have the Ferrari, have Porsche, and then the Datsun Z. It's kind of a rolling restoration, but I'd always loved Datsuns and watched him in SCCA racing, and recently showing the Ferrari, I met John Morton, who's the famous driver that put Datsun on the map, driving for Pete Brock, and what's funny, I showed him the Ferrari. I was looking at the Datsun, and he autographed a book. And he said, "Well, what car do you have?" And I told him about the Ferrari. He came over and spent an hour with me talking about the Ferrari. He said, "I've never had one." But that's yet another story. The Ferrari is, once it's up and running, is very pleasurable to drive. At low speed, that big wooden steering wheel, I mean, you have to use it. It's kind of cumbersome to drive, shall we say. It doesn't have power assist. It doesn't have all the modern amenities. It's tougher to drive around town. The Z is much lighter, unless you put big tires on it. And the one I had while I was in the Pentagon, I put big tires on it, and I'll do the same with this. It's hard to park and things like that, but it's much lighter and easier to steer. Gearbox is more modern and easier to shift and things like that. But the ride, strangely enough, is probably pretty similar. The GTE, even though a family car, does not ride like a typical American family sedan would have ridden in the 1960s. So it's very taut, very European, and the Z is similar to that one.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, John. Thank you for sharing this incredible story with us.
Anytime, Brynn. Happy to share the story, and good on you. Congratulations on the podcast, and keep going, man. You gotta tell the stories of these old cars. Happy to help.
Well, this has been the Exhaust Note Podcast. I'm Brynn Patton. That is John Kenney. We'll see you next time.